We're now going to look at the next section of the GCSE syllabus, which looks at the influences on our healthy active lifestyle. Included in this section then, we will look at what influences us to do sport, the opportunities that are out there for us to get involved in sport. We'll look at the sports participation pyramid, and we'll briefly identify some of the agencies involved in providing more opportunities for sport. The easiest way to remember what influences us to take part in certain sports is to use the acronym which you can see on the screen now, which is CRISP with an H, or CRISPy, however you prefer to remember that, with each of the letters representing a different factor that influences the kind of sports that we do. The C stands for culture, and there are a number of cultural factors that influence the sports that we do. The first one is age. And age influences us because the older you get, the more suited you are to slower paced, more gentle activities such as crown green bowling. Whereas when you're younger, you've got more options and you're influenced by more active and fast paced activities. The next cultural factor is race or religion. And this can influence us because depending on where we come from and the continent that we're born in, different sports will be more popular. For example, in India and Asia, cricket's extremely popular and the most played sport, whereas if you went somewhere like Northern America, obviously the more popular sports over there are things like basketball, baseball, American football, etc. The next cultural factor we'll look at is disability. And although people with disabilities now have the opportunity to take part in many different activities, in some locations or within some sports the resources and the access is not available, and therefore people with disabilities can become limited in some sports. And the final cultural factor is gender, and although most sports are now considered accessible for both boys and girls, some sports do still offer one sex more opportunities than the other. For example, if you was a boy and wanting to get involved with netball, you'd have very, very limited opportunities, whereas girls would be able to access that quite freely. H stands for health and well-being. Firstly, if you were ill, individuals could not take part in sport, and additionally to this, if you had certain health problems, then you would be limited in what you were able to do. For example, if you had severe asthma, then you probably wouldn't be able to take part in a sport which involved a lot of running. R is for resources, and this looks at things such as availability, location, access, and time, which all significantly influence some of the sports that we are able to participate within. And these points can all be summarised really using the following photograph, which just shows that if you were to live in a very rural and isolated location, then obviously the availability of different sports would be low. The location is very deserted, and therefore access to sporting facilities would be very limited. I stands for image, and this is a very powerful cultural factor in terms of how it influences the sports that we do. Firstly, through fashion, and people like Cristiano Ronaldo, when they wear their pink and silver boots and their white ankle protectors, then that influences other people to want to go out, buy the same sorts of boots, wear the same sorts of accessories in order to participate within their sport. In addition to fashion, there's also media coverage, and this is very powerful in how it influences people to participate in sports. For example, during Wimbledon, when it's on terrestrial TV non-stop, the numbers or the amount of people who want to participate in tennis significantly increase, likewise for the golf or during the World Cup for football, etc. On the flip side to that, sports which are not shown on TV and don't get the coverage, for example badminton or squash, numbers and participation rates are relatively low because people don't see them as much. S stands for socio-economic, and that looks at the influences which involve cost. For example, some sports, traditionally things like golf and horse riding, cost a lot of money for the equipment. For example, in golf you need shoes, ball, clubs, you need to pay your membership fees, and it can be very expensive. The same applies to horse riding, and therefore if you can't afford those ongoing costs, then obviously you're not going to take part in those sports. And finally, the last factor which influences us is people. And this just suggests that there are different groups of people that influence us in terms of the type of sports that we do. For example, our friends, our family, whichever sports they're into or they expose us to, it's quite likely that they're the sports that we'll end up participating in or enjoying ourselves. In addition to that, obviously role models such as Jessica Ennis, whichever sports we see our role models performing in and succeeding in are the sports that we are quite likely to want to get involved with ourselves. So finally, just to recap then, whenever you need to remember the influences on our healthy and active lifestyle and what impacts on us in terms of the sports that we like, the sports we enjoy, it's important that we remember the acronym CRISPY, which stands for Culture, Health and Wellbeing, Resources, Image, Socio-Economic and People.